A lot of people said, no, that's ridiculous. I have my best friends. I don't need my partner to be my best friend, and so on and so forth. Not in a clinical setting, in more of a casual setting. I joke that the two F's of marriage are important: friendship, and I'll let people fill in the other blank. Welcome to Awake at the Wheel. In this episode, we're going to tie together three different topics that we've discussed in previous episodes. So we're going to revisit the overarching discussion of sexual dysfunction. So you may recall we had some guests on and we spoke about sexual dysfunction as it relates to medication. We're going to look at it more broadly as far as sexual dysfunction in the context of relationships, what we've seen in our practices, and how that plays out. We're also going to revisit the topic of pornography. We talked a lot about what some of the drawbacks are. However, believe it or not, there are actually benefits to it. And this does relate to sexual dysfunction in terms of providing it as a recommendation for treatment. And lastly, we're going to tie in the topic of just enhancing one's sexual health education, knowledge, understanding. So with that, Oren, where should we start?
Well, how about just because in previous episodes we did talk about all the pitfalls of porn and the problems. So maybe we could start with, the positives, so that, it's the balanced take on everything.
Sure. Yeah. So I know one of the experts in the field does believe that the consumption of pornography can have some real benefits in terms of enhancing one's knowledge and understanding of sexual anatomy. So certainly from a clinical perspective, I can definitely agree with that. And with couples who are experiencing some difficulties in their sex lives, that is a recommendation that I've made, and I know that you've made to some of your patients as well.
Right. So I'm going to throw out a term that people can look up if they want. It's called erotophilia and erotophobia. And there's a scale that asks like 36 questions to see how erotophilic or erotophobic you are. So essentially, if you look at the breakdown, so it's basically how much you love or are afraid of or uncomfortable about speaking about, thinking about, engaging in sexual matters. Okay, erotophilia, erotophobia. So when there's research and it looks at the, let's say, benefits of, let's say, pornography, you could look at it two different ways. Either you could say, based on, compared to the norm, people who watch more porn may be doing better than the norm in certain areas. For example, knowledge, comfort, like knowledge of sexuality, knowledge of body parts, and so on, how to please your partner, how to communicate, and so on. So maybe it is increasing it in that regard. Or it's the people who don't watch porn, who just happen to be very erotophobic. And we know that people who are erotophobic, they have very bad outcomes when it comes to sexuality. For example, sexual dysfunction, sexually transmitted infections, unwanted pregnancies, because they're so uncomfortable with the topic in general that they don't avail themselves of all the material, of the information, the resources that could help them have a healthier sex life. So we have to really just, when you look at the research, again, is it the benefits of porn, or is it the fact that the people who don't watch porn already have certain mindsets, perspectives, beliefs that are harming them or that are not really adaptive?
Yeah. And to that point, oftentimes in couples, one of the challenges in this recommendation that we make as far as porn, it can backfire because one partner in the couple may have negative beliefs or opinions about pornography, and the other, maybe is in favor of it, has consumed it themselves. But where this can backfire is that, let's say, for example, the one partner in the couple has experience watching pornography. They've learned a few things that are of interest to them, but their partner feels that that is shameful, that's disgusting, that's gross. How could you want me to do that? So rather than this being a useful treatment recommendation, it can in fact, potentially make things worse, make things more contentious in the relationship, and therefore impact their sexual life even more significantly.
Right. And again, we're trying to make this a positive take on pornography because we talked about all the negatives before.
Yes.
So keeping that in mind, the fact is, I think we talked about this in another podcast, you're never going to find two people who are perfectly aligned on any metric. right? One's going to be more than the other, higher or lower than the other. So when it comes to comfort around sexuality or adventurousness, wanting to go, outside the bounds and so on, there's going to be a discrepancy. Now, the discrepancy might be small enough that you're in the same window or the same band, but for the most part, there's a good chance that one person is going to be considerably higher than the other. And so it's that person's job to not rush too quickly, to not push too much, because either it's going to, repel the partner, or the partner is going to take it. They're not going to say anything about it, and they're going to harbor resentment. And, that's going to have a negative impact on the sexual dynamics and the relationship. So for the person who's, let's say, ahead of the curve compared to your partner, be patient, try to get to where their level is, and slowly try to raise the tide or bump them up a little bit. Don't push too hard. And for the person who is more inhibited, you're maybe not as adventurous and so on, please do understand. I've talked about this with many patients. The fact is, if you're in a relationship, sex is an important part of it. I've had many patients who felt ashamed, like, oh my God, they're such a great partner in every other area, but this, how could I leave such a great person, only because they don't want to have sex, for example? Well, sex is a huge part of it. So I've told many patients, I said, look, I'm not advocating or I'm not supporting this, but there's a chance that if you're not able to rise higher, okay, and I'm not talking about something that's going to harm them or that's going to cause them distress or anything like that. I'm just saying, if your partner's more adventurous and you don't want to go on the journeys with them, there is a chance that either they're going to eventually leave you, or they're going to step outside of the relationship to get those needs met with somebody else. And again, I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying I tell them the truth. So you have to find a happy medium somewhere, that the both of you feel comfortable. And such a cliche, but the only way to navigate this properly is with proper communication. Each of you feeling safe enough to express your needs and to express what your boundaries are and how far you're willing to go, giving some idea of timelines, giving some hope. If someone says, no, absolutely not, I'm never going to do this, but what do you expect from your partner? You're going to engender resentment in them. And once again, they may leave you or step outside. Okay. But if you give hope and say, look, you know what, let's just do it this way. Give me some time. Here's what I need to help me, to feel better in this regard. What are you doing to reciprocate? If I'm willing to do this in this area, I'm willing to explore. Are you going to help out more around the house? Are you going to take care of the kids more? Are you going to, say nicer things to me, right? There's got to be some reciprocity involved.
Yeah, and to your point, we've spoken in other episodes about sexuality as far as dating, or at least I think we focused on it more in that respect. But I think it is abundantly important for people to understand the importance of a healthy sex life in a marriage. And yeah, people are uncomfortable about it. They don't talk about it in the beginning of the relationship. So why 30 years later are they going to all of a sudden be comfortable about it? They're unfortunately not. And that's, what we see in our clinical practices. It's startling the number of sexless marriages that are out there and the lack of vocabulary, ability, communication that couples have. So I guess, maybe it's important for us to address the question that listeners may have as far as, well, why do we recommend pornography? It's not necessarily strictly for the purpose of arousal, but, when people have been together for 20, 30, 40 years, things change, tastes change, physiology changes, what arouses them changes, and, the list goes on. So not only is it for the, the obvious arousal that they will likely achieve by watching other people having sex, but it's to learn and to enhance their, sexual vocabulary, interest, and, try different things, try new things.
Right. And again, it's a bonding experience. You're watching something together. It's like watching a TV show together, for example. Now, you may not be watching the porn for the plot lines, okay? But, even if you're laughing, even if you're enjoying, even if you're looking at, oh my gosh, I had no idea that so many people had a foot fetish, whatever it is, it's helping bring you together on some same page. And if that is the way to help facilitate communication or connectedness, great. But I tell people that, if you're the more adventurous one, I say, look, I don't care what your tastes are with porn. Okay. It's up to, let your partner kind of choose, let them feel, you've maybe gone through Pornhub or whatever 1 billion times. They maybe have not. Let them navigate, let them kind of lead the pace and everything like that. And again, you're learning more about the person. You're learning, like, you had no idea that they're into this or that. So again, taking any context and not just limiting it to that specific context, but seeing if you can broaden it. Once again, are you broadening it to better communication, knowing more about your partner, maybe finding out something about their past? Who knows? There's many benefits that you can derive from porn beyond, as you say, just the simple arousal.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about sexless marriages, because I'm sure you've heard this line from patients before, as have I. I love my partner, but we're not having sex, and it's often prefaced with, "Well, I love them," and it's almost this presupposition that if you love someone, then you must want to have sex with them. But I think that couples need to understand that, there's so many different layers to it. And when it comes to the vitality that comes from having a healthy erotic sex life, doing the dishes, cleaning the house, arguing about pickups and drop-offs, that kills that eroticism. And I think as well, the whole topic of, well, I love my partner, that's great. You also love other family members. And I don't say this to be weird, but oftentimes that love for one's partner can be overgeneralized into the same feeling of love that they have for other family members, which in turn, I think, kills that sex drive or that sexual attraction.
Right. And I may have talked about this in another podcast, Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Not sure if I did or not. I did?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to remind people that it's not the greatest model. I won't say everything, but he basically talked about 3 points of the triangle. There was passion, intimacy, which is more emotional intimacy, and commitment. And so you have to understand, yeah, of course, there's lots of passion at the beginning. You hope, not always, but you hope at the beginning of a relationship, there's lots of passion. And then as you get to know the person more, there's the more emotional commitment, intimacy, more connectedness. Then you're committed to the person. And as Malini is saying, that, yeah, if you have that emotional intimacy, or at least the commitment, this is your family, okay? You love them in the broader sense, like, well, again, they're my family, they're who I am, right? Yeah. That passion part of the triangle can so easily be depleted or ignored. So it's really important, and it doesn't naturally come back. It doesn't just happen, right? For some people, it does. Maybe the person was in a depressed state for a while. Maybe they were stressed out at work. Maybe there was too much time focused on work, kids, something, school or something else like that. And then when that was kind of, let's say, taken care of, then there was more space to have, a libido or to have time to spend with your partner and so on. But it doesn't necessarily happen that way. There has to be a discussion about it. There has to be a tactful, a constructive communication about it, rather than kind of complaining, rather than blaming, rather than guilting or shaming. So, it's really hard after, as you say, 10, 20, 30 years of being in this kind of this plateau kind of complacency, kind of like, we're a family unit. All right. So it can be difficult, can be hard. And as soon as you bring up the discussion, well, you've shown a light on what the problem is. And so many couples don't want to talk about that problem. Whether it's about sex, well, of all the problems, sex is the one that people are least likely to talk about. It's uncomfortable. It's very personal. It's very direct. People take it the wrong way in most cases. And so I can understand that it's very uncomfortable to talk about, but it's something that it's going to have to be, it has to be discussed, because otherwise, as we've talked in other podcasts, you are going to basically make a perfect situation where one of you or both of you is going to be stepping outside of the relationship. And even if it's not sexual, even if it's virtual only, even if the person never sex, but because sex, sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, these are interconnected. So if you're not getting, and you find someone else online or at work or somewhere else where they get you, they make you feel better about yourself, and libido, Freud talked about libido. Libido is not just the sex drive. Libido is the life energy. So if your sex drive is dead because you haven't had sex for so long, and then you meet somebody who just makes you feel more alive, that can easily get intermingled with that sex drive. And you can feel these sexual feelings for somebody, even if you don't act on them. But the point is, all that energy, all that arousal and everything is being directed in the wrong place. And that's what happens when you don't have that honest, open discussion with your partner. Well, based on my anecdotal evidence, I'm talking thousands of people through my students and patients. Right. I just see it happen all the time, and among people that you wouldn't expect. Okay. You wouldn't look at this person and think, oh my gosh, this person is having this wild and crazy sex life, whether virtual or in real life, with somebody else outside of the relationship. You cannot always predict. And again, if I give you a lineup of all my patients who've done that, some people you would look at them and go, yeah, I can see them doing it. Okay. But there are so many others you would have no idea. That's how powerful sex is. Because again, it's not just about the sex, it's about the connectedness, that social, emotional, interpersonal connectedness.
Yeah, so I bet you some listeners are thinking to themselves, that's great, Doc. That's great, Melanie. Like, communicate. Okay, how? How do we communicate about that? So I think that a very important precursor to that communication is a great deal of self-reflection. So a couple of things I'll say here. So when it comes to stepping outside of the marriage, you mentioned a couple of things there. I think that seeking out, again, that vitality, that feeling of being alive is incredibly important. And if someone isn't getting that in other areas of their lives, yeah, it can translate into a sexual relationship, even if the intention wasn't there and even if it wasn't purely about sex. And I think a second important piece of self-reflection needs to be, if someone is stepping outside the marriage, what is it that they're seeking? And we may have talked about this a little bit in our previous episode about this topic, but it really bears repeating as far as, if you're stepping outside of the marriage, is there something within yourself that is lacking that you're hoping to achieve by stepping out? So, whether this is, again, that vitality, having experiences that you didn't have before, any number of things. But again, that self-reflection piece is very important. And as far as, broaching the subject, I think that that's probably what people have the hardest time with, is not really knowing what to say, because I think that there's some fear that comes along with, well, I don't want to hurt my partner's feelings. Or I think there's even some cultural considerations that we haven't even touched on here that, in some cultures, in many cultures, you just don't talk about sex with your partner. Sex is a mechanism. You do it, you get it done, and that's that. But the fact is, regardless of the cultural aspects of it, we're all human. We still all have the same physiological and emotional needs.
Right. And just one thing about those needs, talking about those needs, when you talked about, is there something lacking in yourself? Well, one of the top things that is lacking in people's lives is validation. Okay. Now, and I mean, like, self-validation. Do I feel worthy enough? Have I accomplished enough? Am I leading a fulfilled life? So if you're with a partner, and again, there's stagnation in that relationship, whether it's about sex or something else, right? It can make someone really feel like, I am missing something. And instead of looking at saying, okay, well, what can I do to get that sense of validation, or esteem, right, by myself, right? They look at the other person and they're like, well, they don't validate me enough. They don't make me feel good enough. Right. So that kind of resentment, and we talked before about resentment and what it does to people, that can make it easier for them to then step outside of the relationship and not feel as bad about it. Because instead of saying, well, I'm doing this because I feel bad and I'm not looking at other ways to make myself feel better, it's more about, they're making me feel bad, therefore it's okay for me to seek recourse elsewhere, right? So, and that's, all of that is the antithesis of what you're just talking about, which is broaching an uncomfortable topic with your partner, the person you're supposedly committed to. Because if you feel all this resentment toward them and they're making me feel this way, how do you feel safe? How do you feel comfortable enough to raise a topic that is uncomfortable for each of you, and very likely going to cause the other person to feel resentment towards you? Because even if both of you are miserable and you're living this just stagnant, basic life, right? You can lie to yourselves and try to portray it as something that it's not. As soon as somebody goes, hey, we got to talk about that giant sexless elephant in the room, right? That's when you've poked a hole through the illusion, and now people are really uncomfortable. And I've talked about this in so many other contexts. It doesn't just have to be sex. In so many different ways where people there's this collusion of silence. You both know something's wrong, or either something's wrong, or you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, or there's something going on here. There's another layer, okay, that you're ignoring. You're pretending that this is what's happening. In reality, there's the subtext down here, and no one wants to talk about it. And it's okay. We can do whatever as long as we pretend this is not really happening. As soon as you start talking about this, everything shifts. Shit gets real, and that reality is very uncomfortable for people. And so many people will do anything in their power to avoid such discomfort.
Yeah. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. That's uncomfortable. But what's more uncomfortable is getting a divorce. So, and, not to boil everything down to sex, but our point is that it is incredibly important to have, healthy communication, healthy emotional intimacy, and healthy physical intimacy. So back to my question, as far as, how can this topic be broached? I think that, it's important for us to maybe highlight what we do actually recommend to real patients and clients. So, in relationships where 20 years have passed and they haven't so much as held hands, it would be unreasonable to suggest, start watching porn and, see where you get. That's a little bit too much. That's maybe a little too difficult to start out with. So small acts of physical intimacy, to develop emotional intimacy. So holding hands, sitting closer together, looking at each other in the eyes. That's one of the biggest things that I notice in couples therapy, and I'm sure you have as well, is couples are sitting, stiff as a board, staring straight ahead at me or at the wall. And oftentimes I will tell them, like, literally turn towards each other, look at each other. And at first I notice a lot of discomfort, and then something shifts. So I'm sure you've seen that too.
Yeah, and especially when it's online, because whether it's in the office or online, these are two different spaces. Yeah. But when it's online, they're both looking at the camera. They're looking at me. And I say to them, I get it. I know you're telling me because I'm here. I say, but again, look at the other person, tell them directly. And I see the exact same thing that you see as well. And especially if it's a discussion they've already had. I'll say, I know you've already had this discussion with the two of you, but let's try it again. Let's see if we can get something else happening. And you're right, there is that discomfort. And when you talk about trying to make more eye contact and everything, well, look at my family, we're guilty of this as well at times. Look at what happens when you're all sitting at the table, or it's just the two of you sitting there. Yep. You're on your phones. You're not making that contact. And by the way, when we talk about hand holding or a bit more physical intimacy, right? You don't know how. I mean, I'm sure maybe you do. Like I've had so many couples, or one person who says, "I tried that," and the person flinched, or they got uncomfortable. Yes, if you just suddenly do it without saying anything, you're breaking the routine. It is a bit uncomfortable. Don't hold that against them. All right. Either say, "Hey, and explain to them, you know what? Just want to hold your hand. That's all." Right? Well, why? I love you. I just want to, I appreciate you, something like that. And because so many people, again, they almost checked out. They want an excuse, whether to actually leave or, again, to check out emotionally and to do whatever they want to do in their own life, to just disconnect from their partner. They'll use, that's my validation for doing what I'm doing. That's my excuse. So, give the person the benefit of the doubt. Understand that you're both, in this limbo, basically, in this, this complacent, stagnant life, right? And if one of you is trying to make the change, which is great, it takes a bit of time for the system to adjust. So, again, give them a period of grace, try that, and, even communicating with them. And again, just focusing on, the fact is this, though, I'll ask you, Malini. So what if someone does do that? I mean, I've had a number of patients, I'm sure you have. So let's say they have tried to have more intimacy, physical, talking, whether it's sexual, anything else like that. And the other partner is they've already checked out and they don't want to do it. What do you say to them? And they say they're older.
Well, so this does come up, and perhaps this is not the response that you specifically were looking for, but what I do is I go back to self-reflection. Well, why is it that you think that your partner is responding that way? Has sex become something transactional over the years? Is it that every time you hold her hand, it's that you expect that she's going to have sex? So I think that, and I'm picking on men here because I do often hear this from female patients and clients, but that rebuffing, that pulling back usually comes from, because I know what's next. I know that he's not just holding my hand. I know that it's because he wants sex.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And that's a really important point. And when you say that to the person, let's say to the man, do they kind of do they rebuff you, or do they reflect on it and they go, "Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about that"? How does
it depends on the client. I would say most of them, because the ones that I will broach such a sensitive thing with, I usually have a good rapport with, they will take that step back and think. There's a little bit of self-reflection. There's a little bit of blame on her because, she's cold, she's this, she's that. So I would say it's 50-50.
Right. Okay. And I'll say some things that, again, people don't like when they hear it, but I tell people I don't deal with fantasy. I deal with reality. And I like to, kind of lay out the different realities for them, because I'm not going to tell anyone what the right thing to do is. I just want them. Therapy should be the safe space where they can discuss the darkest, the worst, the kind of things, and then look at it and go, what is going to be best for me, and in this case, for your partner, for your family, whatever. So, so in the case where first of all, again, the part about the reflection, it's so important. And when I say that to my patient, I go, look, I'm not saying that you're the only problem here. There's two of you. I say, but the thing is, I'm only talking to you. And I'll tell them, I say, if your partner were here, based on what you've told me, if this is, if they were telling me the same thing, here's what I would tell them. Because I want them, but again, but the point being, they're not here. I'm only talking to you. So we can only focus on what you're going to do. And if you are able to reflect, take complete ownership of what you've done to kind of kill the romance in the relationship and everything like that, and you come with humility and respect, and you either outright acknowledge it or through your behaviors and so on, kind of show this shift, and expect that there will be resistance, because anytime a system changes, there's always resistance. But if you're persistent with it, the system should change. If you do all of that, okay, right? And if, however, you do all that and nothing changes, and your partner still is just like they're having none of it, they totally checked out, then we have those difficult discussions. Do you talk with your partner and say, hey, let's open up the relationship, and we have a loveless marriage, but we still have kids, or we have shared investments or whatever, but I'm going to do my thing, you do your thing, and what's the parameters around that? Okay. Do you just cheat on them without telling them? Do you leave them? Right? You have to have that discussion, because so many people will just live in fantasy, and they're just lying to themselves. And, again, when you lie to yourself, you're not doing yourself any favors.
No. No. So as far as the communication, I suppose the takeaway from this is we acknowledge that it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's better than the alternative, right? Things can't just be left to fester and rot in the relationship and hope that it's going to go away or hope that it's going to get better. But as far as, people educating themselves more, I think that we should maybe talk a little bit about that, as far as like how, again, people in long-term relationships, how do they learn a bit more about, what they like, what they don't like, what else is out there that maybe they haven't tried.
So I always tell people, I tell people, but they also come back and tell me, okay, especially with the internet, that there are so many resources out there, whether it's a blog, Reddit, X, whatever it is. And so that with Google or whatever, you can always find something. Now, there's what you find. So much of it is garbage. So buyer beware. Okay. But I always tell people that instead of just coming cold to the person, like, hey, we got a problem in the relationship, or hey, I want to open up the relationship, or whatever it is, find what looks like, and you have to do your own research, find what looks like, let's say, a credible, compassionate source. And that this source, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a video, a blog, Reddit forum or whatever, okay, that you make sure that it's speaking the language, or that the person who's doing the communicating is someone that your partner will be more inclined to go, hey, you know what? This makes sense, or I like this person, whatever. Because if you have an Andrew Tate type person that is going to just totally piss off your partner or scare them, and saying, listen to him, he's got some really good ideas, even if the ideas are good.
It's not going to be productive.
Even if the ideas are good, right?
No.
So I always tell people, what you say is irrelevant. It's what the other person hears. So find those sources. And again, and if it appeals to you, great. But if it's not going to appeal to your partner, you're not really, doing the best that you can do. So there are so many books, whatever, articles, find that, and then just say, hey, let's talk about that. All right. And because it's always, and this is what I do with patients, I'll tell them other patients' stories I always tell them I distort the story, and there's always confidentiality. Okay. But I tell them it's so much easier to see your own life, your own experiences through someone else's, because when someone talks about you, your defenses automatically go up. You need to protect yourself. You don't want to be seen a certain way. But if you're watching somebody else who has a similar situation, the defenses are down when they're seeing it. So you can see it more honestly. You can gain some insights from that. You can see new perspectives. So I always say, bring these other resources, use those as the starting point. Okay. And if you say, look, I really got to talk to you, we have that, then they're already getting the defenses up. But if it's kind of like, almost casual, hey, you know what? I saw this program or whatever else, maybe something that the two of you can read or watch together, right? Whatever the case may be, you introduce it in a very casual, almost sideways way, so the defenses aren't up automatically. Once their foot is in the door, now it's easier, or once your foot is in the door, once you open the door, it's a bit easier for them to now hear what you have to say about yourselves, but start with this outside source and then kind of, merge it into your own situation. That's the recommendation that I give.
Yeah. Yeah. So two really important things to emphasize there is come equipped to the conversation with, information to share, and be lighthearted, because, while on the one hand, we're talking about how important sex is, it's also fun. It's also recreational, and within the confines of a marriage can be fun. So approaching the conversation as such will be a lot more constructive than, like you said, we need to have a talk, and turning it into, a big issue. So next, I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about, what some of these sources of sexual dysfunction can be, and what we've seen. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we've talked about some of the side effects that occur from medications, and we have a whole episode on that people can check out. But I think it's also important to look at some psychosocial factors that can contribute to lack of desire, lack of sexual intimacy in marriages. So I mentioned, the day-to-day mundane stuff that can take place. That's certainly a buzzkill. Depression, anxiety, those are certainly things that we encounter in the practice that do inhibit one's sexual desire, sexual function. But what are maybe some less common or less known things that you've come across that can interfere with people's sexual desire and function?
Well, let's go with porn. That we talked about this in the previous episode. I won't go into too much detail, but people who have an unhealthy relationship with porn, that can be one. So it's the feeling of, and we talked again about the validation. If you feel, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this in other podcasts about resentment. I can't stress this enough. Whatever the source is, if you feel some form of let's say unregistered, untapped resentment towards your partner, you're not even aware of it, maybe. Because if you have this resentment, I know I said it before, but I think it's so important for people to understand. Resentment is simply the feeling that you've wronged me some way and I'm upset about it. And if you've wronged me, my brain tells me I need to get you back somehow, whether it's aggression, whether it's nastiness, whether it's withdrawing, whether it's withholding things. The fact is that if I'm feeling resentment towards you, if I feel that you've wronged me, I feel you owe me, or I got to get back at you. How am I going to overcome my negativity, my anxiety, my discomfort, whatever it is? How am I going to motivate myself to overcome this mountain when I feel like, why am I doing this for this person who I feel has wronged me? What are they going to do? So I'm telling you, this sense of resentment, I find it just interferes so much with all aspects of the relationship, especially sex, because especially for a woman, or a man, if he's in the less dominant role, having somebody impose themselves on you, right? It can feel like, oh my gosh, this person is just like, manhandling, or just they're just using me almost. It feels like that when you don't have that emotional intimacy with the person, like, they're getting off and I'm not really enjoying things like that, right? So, and there's nothing more personal, nothing that makes you more vulnerable than sex. Being naked, being with another person, especially when they're the dominant one. So again, what I find that resentment, more than anything else, is the number one thing that couples have to deal with. And because everything regresses onto sex, no matter what the other issues are, regresses onto resentment. Everything regresses down to resentment. Yeah. No matter what the other issues that we can bring up are, in the end, it usually fuels this sense of resentment towards your partner. And people are afraid to talk about resentment, but just own it. Just again, I feel, by the way, and I always say to people, I should say this very clearly, resentment is often unconscious, unfair, and often irrational. So if you can acknowledge that and just say, you know what, hey, even if you don't tell the partner that you resent them, if you say to yourself, I resent my partner, but A, again, it could be unfair or irrational, and B, all the stuff I feel toward them, they are probably feeling something toward me as well. I can't deny that. So I can't just impose my will on them. I have to recognize that maybe they have to overcome their resentment as well. So I have to come there with grace, humility, own my own shit, and then talk to them about that. And again, so whatever the problem happens to be, if you come with that perspective, you have a much better chance of being able to, to overcome it. And by the way, one final thing with that, because I've worked with many couples where I talk about that again, think about everything I've done wrong toward my partner, because then it's not just about you, like you're in your mind, right? And then second, I say, also then switch it and think of all the things that you're grateful for. I know it's a cliche, but you come with gratitude.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this, essentially is what you're talking about, but I think we'll take it a layer deeper as far as looking at the importance of having, and maybe this is an unpopular opinion. And I say this because I thought that this was commonly agreed upon, but doesn't seem to be based on what I've read online from others. But I think having a baseline of a friendship is really important. So, we've talked about having each other's back and knowing that there's that unconditional feeling of they have your back. I think that oftentimes that is missing and seems to be a common element in these sexless relationships is that they don't have that closeness, that friendship. But to be tangential a bit, I read a post online. There was a question being posed of, do you think that married couples should be best friends? And it seemed pretty split. A lot of people said, no, that's ridiculous. I have my best friends. I don't need my partner to be my best friend, and so on and so forth. Not in a clinical setting, and in more of a casual setting, I joke that the two F's of marriage are important: friendship, and I'll let people fill in the other blank. But I think the two do go hand in hand as far as having, again, that emotional bond, that emotional closeness. So what are your thoughts on, having a baseline of friendship and being best friends?
Yeah, that's tricky. Being friends for sure, okay, I think is essential. The part about being best friends, yeah, it depends. If you say exclusive best friend versus different best friends can give you different things. So, right. So definitely being friendly, feeling that you can share with the person, that you can trust them, that you want to spend time with them and everything. I think that has to be the case. But, anything can go too far. And I've seen codependent couples, or that they spend all the time with each other, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that's not healthy, right? So anything we're talking about, of course, people have to understand, we're not talking about going too extreme. So, and again, even friends, the fact is, the funny thing is, males and females, what constitutes a really healthy, deep, connected friendship can be totally different for a male and a female. In general, of course, we're talking in general, right?
Yeah.
And then individually, everyone has a different sense of, what do I, want in a friend? What do I want in a partner? How much time do I need with them and everything? And it's amazing if you actually sat down any couple, okay, whether 1 month together or 30 years, and you ask them these kinds of questions like, how many times per week do you think your partner wants sex? Okay. How much time per day do you think your partner wants to sit and talk with you? How many, what do you want? What do you think your partner wants you to do in this situation? If you're complaining, how do you think they want you to react? If you did that for all these different metrics, like, people are not going to be perfect, right? It's not reasonable. So everybody is different in that regard. So again, to get back to the question about being best friend, I'm not so sure about that. Depends on what you consider to be best friend. Okay. But again, to being someone who you are really, really friendly with, whatever that means to each of you. Okay. And again, to each of you, and to recognize that each of you has a different definition, maybe. Okay. That to me is a bit more attainable, let's say.
And I think in part my theory of the two F's of marriage come from the fact that some people treat their friends better than they treat their spouse, right? So sometimes when now in a clinical setting, when I ask clients, are you friends with your partner? And there's often a perplexed look on their face, because it's like, well, no. And I will often bring up the example of, well, do you treat your best friend this way? Would you speak to your best friend this way? No. So while I completely hear what you're saying, on the other hand, I think that people should, again, reflect and ask themselves questions like that, as far as, well, if I wouldn't treat a friend this way, why am I treating my partner, who is, this person who should be one of the number one people in my life?
Exactly. And we know that's a cliche. You hurt the ones that you love. We know that people treat family members differently than they do others, right? But again, to keep that in mind, and go, whoa, just because that's normal or common doesn't make it healthy. Right. And that goes back to, again, this idea of thinking that. So I don't know if I did this in a different podcast, but this is like a simple intervention. We always try to say, what can people do? So here's like a basic intervention that if you do it, it can shift your perspective completely, which is, it goes back to this whole idea about taking ownership of what you yourself do. But in this case, this is more about gratitude. And again, I think I may have talked about it before, but if your partner does something that drives you crazy, okay, everyone's first reaction instinctually is, the way that schemata work is, that if you think of one thing, suddenly depending on how bad it is, like you're going to think of all these other stuff. Okay. Now it might not be a conscious thought of all these different things your partner does, but the emotions that go along with that, they get triggered. So that now this one tiny incident, okay, can suddenly like, why am I feeling so upset with this person? Well, because consciously or unconsciously, a cascade of other memories of all these other things that your partner does that make you upset or drives you crazy or whatever, that's happening. So what to do in that situation? Train yourself. As soon as you have that reaction, stop and go, think of at least one thing that I'm grateful for toward my partner for, okay, or one great trait about them or attribute, or even if it's not about you, something that attracted you to them in the first place, and just work on that. It's not going to happen automatically. That's not the instinct. The instinct is to go within the wave or with the wave of whatever emotion you're feeling. So if that's hostility, resentment, anger, bitterness, whatever, you're going to feed into that. But if you stop it and go, no, I got to tether myself to this gratitude, you have a chance, A, not to succumb to all this other crap, and B, to see your partner in a different perspective, that more positive perspective. And then you have a better chance of not building up this mountain of resentment.
Absolutely. And yeah, as far as what people can do about this, I'm going to build on what you said. And perhaps because we work together, I have the same opinion of you or as you on this. But I'm reminded of John Gottman's work as far as the positive interactions. I think he said something about the 5-to-1 ratio. We now think it's actually 10-to-1 ratio, as far as for every one negative interaction, you need to have 5 to 10 positive to outweigh it. So it's really important for us to consciously and purposefully remind ourselves of the good things that are in our relationships and in our interactions. And also in Gottman's research, and I might not be quoting it completely correctly, but and certainly not in a delusional or unhealthy way, but his research did find that those couples who hold their partner on a pedestal tend to be the happiest. So again, not in a delusional way and not ignoring abusive behavior, but if you hold your partner in high regard, those negative things aren't going to feel as negative or as impactful if you generally think that they're a great person.
Right. And again, that's what we call the positive illusion, not delusional, okay, but just see them in a more positive light. So yeah, it's very important. And to be realistic, all right, because when you first date somebody, you're not dating, or you're not seeing the person for who they are. You're seeing them for who you think they are, for who you need them to be, who you want them to be. That's not their fault. Okay. I mean, sure, it's partly their fault because everyone deceives you at the beginning because they put on the best presentation. Right. Yeah. But whatever you think that they are and what they're going to do for you and so on, well, take ownership, because maybe you had unrealistic expectations. And so you held them on too high of a pedestal and they didn't live up to it. Well, shift that and say, but wait, there are things that they do, as you said, like, again, find that gratitude, put them back on the pedestal, maybe make it a bit of a smaller pedestal, but, put them back. And at the very least, and this is very important, again, if I resent my partner and I think that they've wronged me, why am I going to do all this stuff? Why am I going to look at them in a positive light? Well, because in the end, it's going to benefit you. It's all it's self-interest. Okay. And I've said this so many times, self-interest or self-serving does not have to be selfish. If you're not harming anybody, if you're doing it for your benefit, and through your benefit, you can also benefit others, including, in this case, your partner, right? You're not doing anything wrong. But start with, how is this going to help me? So having gratitude for your partner, seeing them in a better light, and all these things, these will benefit you. And that's what, in the end, that's what you should be doing. But once again, benefit yourself so that you can do right by others. And another thing, I think we've talked about this in other podcasts, it's so important. All species, including humans, we function based on reciprocity. You can't just take, you gotta give. And if you're giving and you think that your partner is not giving back enough, have that communication. Okay. But before you do that, maybe you're giving in one way and your partner is giving in another way. Recognize that. So again, before you start saying, well, here's what you're failing to do, or here's what I'm lacking, or whatever, try your hardest to see, what am I getting from my partner? Okay, that I might not have recognized. What are they doing? How are they making my life easier? How are they enhancing my sense of self, or whatever else like that? Look for that. And then also think, wait, if I were in my partner's shoes, and if they were saying, I don't feel that reciprocity, right? What can I do more, right, to try to make them feel that, yeah, there is this equal give and take? Because maybe you're being really selfish in many things. And by the way, I always tell people, the reciprocity, even if you can't, I mean, it's never going to be perfect. Even if in actions, it's not perfect. Words, expressing gratitude genuinely, saying, I am so lucky to have you, or thank you so much for this or that. When you're in a long-term relationship, those things kind of go out the window many times, right? So bring these simple things back. It's so, it sounds so, relationship therapy 101. Okay. But there is a lot of merit to it. Simple, kind words. And I'll let you jump in, Malini, but afterwards, did we talk about the 5 love languages before? Okay, so someone listen to our previous podcast about the love languages and just recognize that maybe for you, words might be what you need to hear, but maybe the partner wants actions. Okay, maybe they want it somewhere else. So just finding out again what will resonate most with your partner. Start with what you know will work, but then try your best to find what the partner needs from you. Again, if hearing "I love you" every day it's like white noise to your partner, then show it some other way. But again, it's that idea of I'm not just taking. I'm bringing something to the relationship. What can I do to make this dynamic, this relationship better?
And to that point, I would say, again, within the confines of a healthy, loving relationship, reframing your actions, and this should be reciprocal, but reframing your actions of how can I make my partner's day better? What can I do to improve their life? And if both partners have that attitude, I think I know a beautiful relationship would result.
Exactly. And by the way, this is just because we talked earlier about porn and everything. And I can't remember if I talked about this in another podcast. I think I did. But one thing, just to kind of bring that in, because one of the 5 love languages is quality time. And that's the most ambiguous. What I think I said this in the previous podcast. Sitting on the couch watching TV together, for one person, that's quality time. For the other person, that's garbage, right? So, right. Yeah. So there's all these different types of quality time. But bringing back to what we were talking about again, I may have said this before. If you want to bring a bit of a spark back in the relationship, because it's not going to happen organically, right? After 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, that spark, that passion, that lust, that it goes away because of all these other things, but it can be reignited. So one shared experience that you can do is you find, there's 2 ways you can do it. Either you go online and you find sex toys, oils, whatever, okay, online, and you together, you purchase them, you see, oh, that'll be fun or whatever, okay? Or even better, you go to a reputable sex store. Not some sleazy place down, whatever, but a really nice place, okay, where you're not going to be ashamed and have fun there. Ask questions of each other, of the sales clerk, whatever. That's why it's good to be in a reputable place. You don't want some place where they're going to make you feel like crap, okay? Go where, anyway, do your search in your town if you have that. And again, if you don't have anything like that, then online, find something like that, okay? Or some other naughty thing that you normally wouldn't think of doing. Find ways to bring some fun, excitement into the relationship, a bit of role playing, whatever. I think we've talked about this in previous podcasts, okay? But just understand that these things, again, all that kind of passion and everything just naturally dies down over time. B, it can be reignited, okay? And C, this is so important. Don't expect your partner to do it. Don't say, well, they're not doing anything, or I know they're going to resist it. I've had so many patients
take the lead.
Why
do
not?
It.
Why does it have to be your partner? Well, no. Okay. Yeah. And I've had so many people, by the way, when they come into couples therapy or they come in individually, right? And then I say, is this something, maybe you'd like to bring your partner in and, to have couples therapy? And I've had so many people say, my partner would never go for this, or that. Surprise. Yes, they would. And the biggest thing they wouldn't go for is they wouldn't even come into couples therapy. The partner comes in and they're the better partner in the therapy, because it's like, yes, they wanted to do this all along, but you guys just didn't have the right language or the right energy to between the two of you to facilitate this.
And to that point, and to our listeners, I'll emphasize these are things that we both recommend in our practices. And I've actually had couples say we've had the best sex of our life because of these things. So, this isn't a joke. This is all real stuff that people can pretty easily implement if you can just break through that discomfort of the initial conversation. But that said, listeners, as always, we want your questions. We want your comments. We want to know what you think about this. And with that, Oren, any last thoughts?
Well, I hope that, we didn't get into so much detail about porn and everything, but I hope we did help, let's say, present this idea that whether it's porn, whether it's toys, whether it's changing the language, whatever, okay, that find novel, fun, different ways to change things up in the relationship if they're not going the way that you want them to go. And to understand that this is, again, all of this is natural when you're in the same environment with somebody every single day, even if there's no kids, no stress, no whatever, even if it's an ideal situation, you habituate to each other. You get used to each other again. So that sexual chemistry, that energy, it dissipates over time. So it's natural. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong in the relationship. And to that point, whether you're looking for porn, whether you're looking for sex toys, massage oils, whatever else like that, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong in the sexual realm as well. It's not. It doesn't have to be dysfunctional. It could be just that you're enhancing what you already have.
Yeah, it's not perverted. It's nothing like that. It's an enhancement of something that is perfectly healthy and natural.
Exactly. So have the right perspective, have an open perspective. And as always, if you, again, I talked about it before, but if you have difficulty broaching the subject as is, find a way to open that door. A TV show, a movie, a blog post, or whatever. Just talk about that, because it's much easier, again, to think about yourselves through the lens of someone else's experience, words, whatever it is. Okay. So start with that. But someone has to take the lead. And if your partner's not doing it, then we really hope that you will as well. So until then, or no, you will instead of your partner. Sorry. Okay. So until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.